Hello, hi everybody, and welcome to the San Antonio Book Festival. My name is Bergen Streetman, and I'm the marketing director at Trinity University Press here in San Antonio, and we're so excited to have you here today. The session you're joining is called "And Now for Something Funny," unlike 2021, and then we could say 2020 and so on, and I think everyone can relate to that. The writers we have with us today are Julian Claiborne Johnson, and Stephen Rowley. Julia has written Better Luck Next Time, this book right here, and Stephen is the author of The Guncle. Now, but before we get started, I want to encourage everybody, if you're thinking about buying any of the books, either today or in another session, please consider purchasing them from Nowhere Books, which is one of our indie bookstores here in San Antonio. There's a link right on the main stage where you can buy the books. As you know, lots of independent bookstores have had a hard time during the pandemic, so anything we can do to give back to that community, to give back to writers, please think about doing it. So if at this point in the program, if you guys have any questions that you want to ask at any point, just throw them into the Q&A. We'll be kind of taking questions throughout. So without talking anymore, I want to get down to introducing the writers. So Julia Claiborne Johnson grew up on a farm in Tennessee. She attended the University of Virginia and studied creative writing at Boston University. She worked at Mademoiselle and Glamour magazines before moving to Los Angeles with her comedy writer husband. They have two children. Her first book, Be Frank With Me, was an American Booksellers Association debut honor book, the President's Pick in 2016 for Books A Million, and winner of the Audie Award for Best Female Narrator, and a national bestseller, not a mid-list book at all. Her novel, Better Luck Next Time, which was published in January, is her second book. The New York Times said, doesn't a romantic comedy set on a 1930s Nevada dude ranch, teeming with about-to-be divorced women, owe a certain debt to the era's big screen classics? Then again, it's hard to believe a cinematic version could be more fun, which for the New York Times is big time kudos.
I know. Like, who did I pay off to make that happen? And it was money well spent.
And so Stephen Rowley is the author of The Guncle. He's also the author of The Editor and the national bestseller Lily and the Octopus, which was translated into 19 languages. He's worked as a freelance writer, a newspaper columnist, a screenwriter. He was originally from Portland, Maine, and graduated from Emerson College. He lives now in Palm Springs, California, which when you read the book, and you'll get to know very intimately. The Guncle comes out in May, and it tells the story of Patrick, the gay uncle to two adorable kids who come to live with him in Palm Springs after a family tragedy. Oprah Magazine called it a laugh out loud heartwarmer, and Publishers Weekly called it heartwarming and hilarious. So in reading these books, I found a lot of parallels between the two books, even though they take place almost 90 years apart. Both kind of happen out west. Both are centered kind of around a rarefied lifestyle of rich people, be it a divorce camp for rich women or a wealthy playground in Palm Springs. Both are billed as comedies, but both really touch on issues that are a lot deeper and harder, like divorce, family ties, death, love, loss. I don't know what's happening. But they also focus heavily on friendship, which is ironic and apropos because Stephen and Julia are real life friends. And they're both East Coast expats who are now on the West Coast. You want to tell us a little story about how you guys met?
Do you want to tell us, Steve?
Well, sure. We were at, first of all, I miss book festivals and conferences and being in person with all of you, but thank you for joining us online today. It means the world that you would spend an hour with us. And hopefully we'll be back out and rejoining the real world soon. But I met Julia in 2016 when we were at a conference of booksellers in Denver, I think
so,
Institute. Yeah. And I was walking through the lobby of a hotel room with a stack of my books, advanced copies of my first book, Lily and the Octopus, and trying to get booksellers interested. Yeah, I could barely see over the top of the stack.
Yeah, and somehow, Jen was holding the top of the stack.
Yeah. Somehow Julia was like, I'll take one of those. Took one off, so you could probably see just my eyes at that point. And there you were. And we started a conversation and realized we were almost neighbors in Los Angeles, and our debut books were coming out. Mine shortly after yours, and I think you announced right then and there that I would be your conference husband. With
That's right. I forgot about that.
your actual husband, whom I adore. But for the rest of the weekend, we were a tight twosome.
Hmm. And I went home and read his book that night, and I was like, oh my gosh, we have the same sense of humor, and that's so thrilling. That's one of the fun things about books is when you read a book, you feel like you know the person who wrote it, and it's not always the case. But with Steve, it's totally the case.
Yeah,
So.
that's back when we were newbies, and I was excited to, and I devoured your book too, of course, Be Frank with Me, your first novel. And that was back when I was excited to meet writers and read their books. Now I'm like, you know what? Can we have a pact of non-aggression? Like,
Yeah.
You don't have to read my book. I won't read your book. We can just be friends.
Be
It's
friends.
okay.
Exactly.
So in talking about fiction kind of coming from real life, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Guncle first. Since Stephen, the main character Patrick, who is a gay man who lives in Palm Springs. He used to be a movie star, a television star, but he's kind of his spotlight has dimmed a little bit. And he takes on his niece and his nephew for a summer at his home. I just wanted to ask you, Stephen, what kind of from your real life, where did this story idea build out of, and where did you get the narrative from?
Yeah, so I do have a home in Palm Springs, and I am a guncle. If anyone does not know or familiar with the term, a guncle is just sort of slang for gay uncle at this point. And they've sort of taken on, the term has sort of taken on a sort of majesty of its own now. But I do have a house here in Palm Springs with a swimming pool and whatnot, and I have 5 nieces and nephews, the oldest of whom is now 12. And so it is, they love the idea of their uncle who lives in a land of permanent sunshine and a swimming pool you could be in all year round. They're all New Englanders, they're East Coasters. And so that in itself seems pretty magical. But the idea first came when 2 of my nephews came to visit. They were only 3 and 5 at the time. With their parents, but their dad, my brother, is a big sort of corporate trial attorney, and they were as much excited to spend the week with him as with me because he works a lot. And sadly, after being here only 24 hours, he was called into court in Boston and had to leave me with his 2 young kids for the rest of the week, ages 3 and 5. And so I quickly had to do a lot of tap dancing, metaphorical, but probably some actual attempt at flailing legs everywhere just to try to entertain, these boys who were sort of sad for the week. And so I got sort of a real taste of what that was like. And I'd long been interested in Auntie Mame as one of my favorite stories. First the novel, and then the Rosalind Russell did it on Broadway, and then the movie with Rosalind Russell, and then the Broadway musical with Angela Lansbury, and then a very bad movie musical with Lucille Ball. So I'd long been fascinated with that story, and Patrick Dennis, who wrote the novel and created the character, was at least bisexual, if not gay, and sort of came out a bit later in his life. But it got me thinking about writers, a lot of screenwriters, particularly in the mid-century, who created these really fantastic women sometimes as stand-ins for gay men because they couldn't write openly gay characters at the time. And so now that society has changed so rapidly, particularly on LGBT issues, that it was interesting to sort of reclaim kind of a character now and write it perhaps as some a writer 50 years ago might have imagined it if they were free to write that way. So several things sort of came together and inspiration was born.
Well, I was going to say, except for the mid-century architecture there, all you need is the staircase because Patrick already has the caftans.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the caftans! I love the caftans. That's like the best part. Well, it's not the best part. One of the good parts.
I'll be doing a little tour of my caftan closet in a little bit, so follow me on social media. We'll get that out there before the book publishes next month. But
you might think about wearing those to any book events.
Yeah, you should. Oh my God, that'd be so funny.
I know. Well, this is this is technically my first event for the Guncle, which publishes May 25th. So yeah, now I'm dressed up, but come back, and I'll be with a martini and just in a caftan by the time I do my last
floating in the pool.
Yeah, I'll just do it from the pool.
We'll switch now to Julia with I'll let you explain kind of the conceit of the book, but the idea of where did you come across this idea of dude ranches in the 1930s in Reno that helped women who they had to be in state in Nevada for 6 weeks so that then they could get a quickie divorce. Tell us a little bit about how you came across that idea and what made you decide to turn it into a novel.
Well, I thought everybody knew about it because I knew about it. The reason I knew about it is my father actually had a job as a divorce cowboy on one of these ranches during the Depression. If he were still alive, he'd be 104. And he was very handsome and charming and a really good dancer. And there was never a job more made for him than that. And I have a picture, I have visual aids. Here's what he looked like a few years after he probably went when he was off to World War II.
Oh, he was
very handsome, quite a handsome guy. And not at all vain about it. And it was such a big deal in that time. Like movie stars went there, socialites went there, like Barbara Hutton got divorced there some, and all kinds of movie stars, because it was easy to get to Reno by train. And it was such a big deal that it was on the cover of Life magazine in 1937. Here's the copy of the cover. And they would kiss the column of the courthouse, and then they'd go throw their rings supposedly into the river that was right next door. So I always knew about it. And once I got to be older, I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is not a job that most people's dads had, By the
My
time
dad sold insurance, yeah.
Yeah, well, he became an English teacher later on. But by the time I was interested in it, he was too old to really tell stories anymore. And he always had a couple of funny stories he told, but didn't really talk about it much. And he had a first wife who was fantastically wealthy. And after I did the research, I was like, oh, he must have met her there, because where else was a man from a small town who grew up on a dairy farm going to meet somebody who was fantastically wealthy? They weren't married for long. And I'm glad he got divorced, because I'm the product of the second marriage. And I've also been married and divorced once, married. I think Tuesday is my 30th anniversary. So
the second one's
I'm very yeah, this one's a keeper. And my father also, second one was a keeper. They were married for the rest of their life. So that's how I sort of came to it. And I went in with it seems unnatural for the women to be a narrator in a thing like this, because they all go to the camp. They have to have someplace to live for 6 weeks. So people who had dude ranches are like, we can repurpose for this clientele and just print money, basically. That's what they did. And so, but if you've ever seen the black and white movie from the 1930s called The Women, there's a scene where they go there because the woman who wrote the original play had gotten her divorce in Reno. So the women angle had already been covered. And because it was my father's, it was the, inspiration for it, I thought, I'll do it from the guy's point of view. And also, he's been reduced to being, instead of being like, the captain, the top of the heap, sociologically speaking, he's been reduced to being a chorus girl, which is very sort of unnerving for him. And that seemed really interesting to me. And I was writing it, Bergen, and I was like about halfway through it. And I have a bookcase that has all my favorite books on it. And two of my favorite books are True Grit by Charles Portis and Remains of the Day by that Nobel Prize winning guy, Kazuo Ishiguro. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's kind of a big deal. And so I was sitting here working on it. And I was looking, my eyes sort of went over there. I was like, oh my God, I'm writing True Grit meets Remains of the Day. And the cowboys are the butlers. Because that's basically sort of what they were. They were just companions. So, hijinks ensue. It seemed like it would be a fun topic for a novel. And it turned out it was, but it's also sort of heartbreaking because, like Steve, I love a funny book that makes you cry in the end. So.
Well, one of my next questions was, you guys both do comedy really, really well. Stephen kind of in the form of Patrick, who is just naturally funny and entertaining. So a lot of the humor comes directly from him, whereas Julia's kind of comes from awkward situations that happen or how the women deal with them. I wanted to, and as I was reading, they both kind of had a summer camp feel because it was like, in both cases, it was people taken out of their normal surroundings into like some different environment. So it really gave this kind of like stepping outside of normal life. As a writer, can you guys talk about taking something that's not necessarily a funny situation and what that's like to find the humor and write the humor into those kind of situations?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Julia, I love the idea of True Grit meets Remains of the Day. I tried to pitch my first novel, Lily and the Octopus, as a cross between Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking and Moby Dick. And somehow that pitch fell completely flat. That was no one apparently wanted to read it.
I would totally read that book.
Described like that, but I thought it was funny, and I think True Grit and Remains of the Day sounds great.
I would read that book too. So I was actually felt better about my book once I thought about that. I was like, oh, that's a book I would want to read. So anyway, go ahead. Tell Steve.
Yeah, well, somehow Julia and I both. I think we both think we're very funny, and somehow now
we love each other.
Five books between us, we've sort of got known for writing these tearjerkers, and I'm not quite sure how that happened, other than I don't see them as so opposite necessarily. If you're trying to get someone to laugh, you're provoking an emotional sort of response, and that's true. That's true with humor as it is with maybe making someone cry. I know some people have been afraid of a book of mine for whatever reason. I couldn't handle it. I don't want to cry, and I always have to promise them they'll laugh more. I don't know if they'll cry, but I can almost guarantee they will laugh. But two, I always think, like, is that such a bad thing? When I laugh out loud, or if I'm so moved by a piece of art to cry or have an emotional response like that, I think that's a good thing. I welcome that.
Oh yeah.
Don't be afraid of it. But hopefully you're laughing at the right moments and crying at the right moments.
Exactly. Well, my husband's a comedy writer, and the comedy writers have an old saw, which is comedy is tragedy plus time. Because when you say someday we're going to laugh about this, about some horrible thing that's happened, like that's sort of like my mantra. Like, what's the situation where someday you're going to laugh about it? And when I would set out to write a scene, I would think, okay, this is what I want to happen in this scene. What's the most mortifying way it could possibly happen? And I would go from there. So basically, a childhood of being constantly embarrassed about everything I did or said. It was research. Who knew?
It's true, but writing comedy in a novel can be difficult because, and this is why I'm glad I have a writer friend like Julia. And we were neighbors for a while, so we would go take walks together in the late afternoon. Because writing is a very solitary occupation.
Oh my God!
It's also a very sedentary occupation. So whenever we could get up and get our steps in, like that, that was a good thing. But I would go and I would tell Julia a joke, because the problem is, like, when you're writing a novel, it could be 3 years after, so I'm sitting there and I'm writing something that I think is a great joke, and then it's like a comedian waiting potentially like 3 years before someone actually reads it and laughs. The lag time for laughter is really long.
It's excruciating.
It's excruciating, and you're not there. It's not like I can stand over the shoulder of everyone reading my book going, all right, what made you laugh? So, like, you'll kind of never know. So if there are any writers out there, I highly recommend having a writer friend that you can run your material by, just for fun.
Well, also, we both have funny husbands, and my husband is not a big reader of fiction, so I try not to inflict it on him, but he'll read it at least once. And he'll be like in the next room, and I'll hear him start to laugh. And I'll go, "What'd you just laugh about?" Yeah. Which doesn't really make for a relaxed reading experience. So we've learned that we have to be separate from each other when we read each other's stuff. So
yeah.
I want to go back to something I touched on a little earlier, and I'll ask Julia first and then Stephen. Julia, you mentioned that the main character is a man. Well, the narrator is a man, but he's not really even the main character of the book. He narrates this story so well that you kind of get lost in all of the stories he's telling. And really, kind of one of the main relationships other than him is the friendship between Emily and Nina. And you did a really great job of, here's this place where there's all these strong female characters kind of coming in and out. There's the woman and her husband who own the Dune Ranch, the daughter who comes in later. But in thinking about those two, they are kind of, tropes in literature of, the two friends, the one who's kind of more of the wild ass and the one who's more of, more shy and reserved. But those characters do so many surprising things throughout the book that they're not stereotypical at all. How did you go about kind of building those two separate personalities?
Oh, well, the thing I did that I thought was super brilliant on my part is you don't actually see the conversation that they have where they fall, and it's like they're not literally in love, but where they fall in like with each other. They get in a stagecoach because they would, at these divorce ranches, there was a divorce ranch that would take a stagecoach to pick the women up from the train. And I thought, oh, that's so great. I have to have that. And also the first line of the first chapter is took the stagecoach to the airport to get Nina, who was an aviatrix, because I thought that was so fascinating that you could go from a stagecoach to thing. But anyway, they have the conversation where they discover they're going to be best friends inside the stagecoach. So you don't have to hear it. And I was like, I always pat myself on the back. Good one. Because they seem so
That's
similar.
for lunch. Good morning's work. I didn't have to do anything. Let's
got that done. So, anyway, but they each see in the other person a part that they kind of wish they had. They're an opposites attract kind of a thing. And Nina is not a lot like me in the fact that I don't often go into parties wearing only a mask, but like that, just the love of shocking people, that is ingrained. So, and then like you always have to have like, your wingman. So that's sort of how they came together. And I don't know, does this happen with you, Steve? Like once you have them, they take over and you're just like taking dictation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the best comedy comes from a real sense of character. What you really know your character, and then all the jokes are sort of authentically coming from their voice. And that's trial and error sometimes. There are, I'm sure there are several drafts sitting on a shelf somewhere that burn now before they ever see the light of day. But yeah, I think once you nail the character, then absolutely they can start talking to you.
They talk for you. Oh my God! And when you say the multiple versions, I wrote 3 versions of this book, and the third time was the charm. Like I had to throw away 2. It took me that long to get to it. So.
Well, and so many times the more wild ass character in books, kind of crashes and burns at the end and screws everybody over. And Nina didn't do that. Like she really stayed like loyal, even at the end where you sort of assumed that she was teaching the thing to the daughter. And then at the end, she really was, it's like, she was very surprising in that she didn't end up like a lot of those characters usually do in books where they're kind of the bad guy or, it's the kind of horrible, female trope of, the bad girl. And she didn't do that at all.
Well, that was what was interesting for Nina about the whole experience, because she got to sort of see what it was like to be on the other end of it from Emily, because Emily has this 13-year-old daughter who is so nasty to her. And Nina had done the same thing to her mother. And that came from the fact that one of my friend's adult child came to live with us when she first lived in New York, in Los Angeles for a few months. And my daughter was 13 at that point, and she would be super nasty. And one day, Charlotte was this girl's name. She took me into the hall and she said, "Oh my God, I feel so terrible about every mean thing I ever said to my mother." And that's sort of what happened with Nina. Like that really informed that relationship for me. And so Nina was trying really hard to like be sympathetic to both sides. So I liked that about her.
I was going to say, Stephen, there's so many great relationships in your book. As a straight woman, I was like so envious of this dude living in this house with no kids, with like 3 hot guys living next to him, and all they do is like drink and hang out at the pool all day. I was like, wow, it sort of turned into a little bit of a for me.
That's peak living.
But I only know what a throuple is from watching The Politician, so I kind of had come into it that way. But there's the throuple that lives next door. I won't give away what that is if you don't know. There's the relationship that Patrick has with both of his siblings, the relationship that he has with his old agent and his new agent. The one relationship that really, probably even more so than the relationship with the niece and nephew, is the relationship he has with Sarah, which is, I'm not going to call it a Will and Grace relationship, but it is a little bit. And we only really see Sarah in these flashbacks that are done really, really well. I guess I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to do the narrative in that way, where the story was happening and then we see, because you could have begun with their friendship, you could have started in a lot of different places, but I thought that having her come back sort of as memories come back was a really, really great way to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you frame the question, because there is a lot of sort of threes. Patrick and the two kids. There's the throuple over the wall, his neighbors. For anyone, I'll give a hint. Think of an amorous snap, crackle, and pop. That's what a throuple is.
That's right.
Yeah, and then there's a sort of sibling relationship too, Patrick and his brother and his sister, but then there's this tight twosome, and that's Patrick and Sarah, who's the children's mother, who is his best friend from college, and it's right from the first page of the book, so it's not giving anything away. I think that what prompts Patrick to take in the children is that Sarah passes away, and one of something that happened is it's just like real world again infiltrating into art and what we're working on. I lost one of my very best friends from college when I sat down to write this book. She passed away from breast cancer and left behind a 6-year-old son, which is devastating to think about. And our other college friends sort of rallied around, thinking, it's just so heartbreaking to think of as 6-year-old. How much will he remember his mom? How much will he know that she was a remarkable person? How much, when he grows up, will he be able to get a full picture, of who his mom was? And, as her friends, we can provide that, and as he ages, but that was sort of weighing heavily on me. And my friend, who passed, very much, informed that relationship and that character. So like any, like writers do, we write through our grief sometimes to try to understand it. But it did add a real depth to, I hope, to what is could have been a very light and frothy novel otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I particularly liked how he, the character starts off not very maternal at all at the beginning, and a series of really terrifying things happen separate from the mother dying. There's a number of scary things that happen, and at every moment we see him kind of evolve more and more into the mother hen, into a more nurturing person. It was really fun to watch kind of him take that part of her along with him, which was really great.
Yeah, I realized I didn't quite answer your previous question, which is why do we only see her in flashbacks? And it was because, I really tried to put myself in the children's shoes, almost in Patrick's shoes also, who the three of them are all grieving together. And I was like, well, if they don't get Sarah, then the reader really is not going to get her, at least not in real time. So that was one decision, to put her only in flashbacks. But what was interesting for me is I don't have children of my own, and as a writer and an artist, that's raising children or having kids is undoubtedly one of life's great emotional experiences. And so it allowed me to explore like what it's like to be a storyteller and not have that in my quiver, in my arsenal. And it allowed me to explore like, oh, what might I have been like as a parent, or how would I handle these challenges? And like Julie said before, it did make me want to call my mother several times and apologize to her for my own behavior. Yeah.
Too bad my kids are still little. I could loan them to you.
Oh, you could. I know.
Maybe Bergen could send hers for like months at a time.
I know over the course of a pandemic, you had them back in the house for a little bit. I'm sure you would have shuffled them off gladly to Palm Springs for a few weeks.
Oh yeah.
But it's interesting in relation to the pandemic too, which is Patrick having taken these kids into his home totally unprepared is like everyone, we've had to deal with family and kids in our lives in a new way, whether that's just being them at home while we work, or them at schooling at home, or coming back from college because they're not living on campus or whatever. It's been an interesting year.
My next question was, you guys both have these books are very cinematic, and that makes sense in that both of you guys live in a very cinematic world. As you mentioned before, Julia, you're married to a comedy writer. Stephen lives in adjacent, LA adjacent, and has a number of his books that are being made into movies. I wanted to talk about two different parts of the book. I will say that there's a ubiquitous kind of family dance montage in the Guncle,
Mm-hmm.
and I did want to encourage anybody who reads the book and gets to the part where he mentions Wang Chung's "Let's Go" to just say, "Hey Google, will you play the song?" I don't want her to play right now, but I did that, and It was literally one of the most cinematic moments I've ever had with a book ever. I was crying, and the music was playing, and it was very interactive. So I would suggest everybody do that.
In fact, you know what? Here, let's play it right. No, just kidding, because then you'll have to get the rights to broadcast it and whatnot. But I will go to the mat. I do say that "Let's Go" is America's third favorite Wang Chung song, but is actually, in my opinion, the best Wang Chung song. And so for us kids of the 80s, I'll go to the mat defending that. But it's much better than trying to sync up Wizard of Oz and Dark Side of the Moon or whatever. No, this is in a good way. This is just strictly fun.
Yeah, I'm sure audiobooks will turn into that eventually, where they're more
there's been several writers who have made sort of Spotify playlists to go along with their books, and I just think that's fantastic, because music can be such an inspiration while we write. I don't necessarily listen to pop music while I write, but also, it lends to that sort of cinematic feeling, as you say.
I was going to go next to Julia. She mentioned the naked and the donkey head. But there were several. Most of my favorite books and the kind of most cinematic parts were when somebody was naked, and that happened a lot. There's a lot of nudity in this book.
I got to tell you, I said to the editor, I've never typed the word naked so many times in my life. It was crazy. And it's not like there's gratuitous nudity, but people are naked fairly frequently. So
no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, both of those scenes were very evocative of, in both of those instances, whether it was the party or the scene when they're at the lake alone, you really, just the descriptive language and everything you use really put people in that moment. When you're thinking about this, and not that you're necessarily thinking about cinema when you're writing, but when you're in a situation like that, what kind of things do you think about when you're writing and when you're trying to build a scene like that, that creates something that's more rich for people in the same space that the narrator is?
Yep, you broke up for a little bit, but I'm just going to start talking. Exactly. Here's let's talk about the masquerade party thing. They had this masquerade dance. Everybody's supposed to come in costume, and in real life, my son had been in A Midsummer's Night Dream. He played Bottom, and he had this donkey head, and it was paper mache, and it was incredibly beautiful, and I was obsessed with it. And I should print that picture up too, because I think about it all the time. And I had read in all my readings about the 30s, there was a woman who was a social climber, like a gold digger, and she just married progressively. She grew up on a dirt farm in Texas, and she married progressively richer men. And she went to a party somewhere, and I can't remember who it was now, and I think the party might have been in Reno, but maybe not. And she walked in wearing a pair of red high heels and nothing else, and said essentially, they need to see the product before they make the investment. And so I thought that was the most hilarious thing ever. So then I was like, oh, I want to have something like that in my book. So I'll need a mask. And then, there are more elements to that. But then I was like, oh my God, the paper mache donkey's head. And then it actually was integral to the whole book. Like, it just was a sort of a one-off kind of a thing. My editor was like, I love the way it started as a sight gag, and then it became a plot device, and then it was a metaphor. And I was like, yes! And I meant it to be that way. Because you're like this too, or Steve, like you write something you think, and somebody tells you afterwards, that's so smart the way you did that, and you were like, yes! And I meant to do
that, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
From the get-go.
So,
yeah.
But I don't know.
Happy accidents are a big part of novel writing.
Kathleen asked if both of your families used comedy to diffuse difficult situations, or if that was something that came naturally for both of you guys, if you wanted to answer.
You, Steve, you go first.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that came from. I'm the oldest of four kids, so it was a busy household coming and going. I think necessarily when you're living in tight spaces with a lot of people, comedy is necessary to get through that. But I don't know. I don't know that I was necessarily a funny kid. I found humor probably in high school, and then later high school is the first time I remember thinking like, oh, I'm kind of funny, and it was just a way. I think it was a sort of a way to sort of stand out, as I said, in a big family to get attention. Sometimes you need to find something that you can do as a hook and run with it. And for me, I think that was being funny.
Well, yeah, for me, like I was always an oddball and like, never got picked for kickball teams. I'm not still wounded about that. And and like, you discover, well, then you can like make funny things to yourself. Well, I didn't want to go to her sleepover anyway. So, and then when I was 13, I went to the R.G. Cooper Library in Shelbyville, and I discovered P.G. Wodehouse, which was on the floor. It was like the lowest because it was W's, and I read all of them. And a kid growing up on a farm in Tennessee in P.G. Wodehouse, you can see why I had a natural affinity for it. But it just made me laugh so hard. So I think, and also like because my husband's a comedy writer too, and a lot of those guys, this will shock you, are dweeby. And they figured out, like, if they could make people laugh, my husband is like a total stud muffin, but if they could make people laugh, they wouldn't get beat up as much. And so it's really like, obviously a defense mechanism, but it also brings people together in a way that's really kind of great. So
yeah,
that's
I
my
wasn't picked for
story.
kickball either, Julia, but you and I would have had so much fun just standing in the corner, Waldorf and Statlering everyone who was playing.
Exactly.
So, and we would have had much more fun. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So
Tiffany's asking whether or not you guys worry about how your comedy will come across to each reader, because not everyone reads comedy the same or reacts the same. Is that something that you guys think about when you're writing?
Well, on two levels, if I can jump in here, I worry about it, one, just in a delivery. Like I hear it very specifically in my mind that this is how the joke lands, and you have no control over whether a reader is going to interpret it in the same way, and if they don't, whether it will work better for them or worse for them, and you really don't have control over it, as opposed to, like, if I were doing stand-up, I would have total control not only of the material but the delivery as well. So that is difficult. But two, we've lived through a lot in this past year, and there's a lot of social change happening in a good way in the country too. And a character like Patrick, who I mean to be provocative in some ways, it's also, I do worry how some of the comedy will come across. Our idea of what's funny or what's okay to joke about changes over time, and you hope a novel has a long shelf life, but it's hard to create something. A lot of humor comes from something topical, something or has an expiration date, or our ideas of what's funny change rapidly. And so you think about this book in 10 years time, will it still be funny? So I really strive for something that feels timeless. Humor that comes from character instead of from topical situations and
current
things
events,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah, current events, yeah.
I'll ask Julia this question. Tiffany asked a follow-up, which was when making the audiobook, do you have to do anything special beforehand to like direct them on how to deliver humor as you intended it, or do you just kind of have to go with whatever they do?
You have to go with it. But they let you choose. So like for my first book, there's a kid in it, and if the narrator got the kid wrong, it would have ruined the whole book. And the first set of people they sent to me, I was like, no. And so I convinced them to get the person to just read a page of his stuff. And so then I picked, her name is Tavia Gilbert, for that first book. And she won an Audie, which was very exciting. I didn't realize she'd never won one before. That's like winning an Oscar if you're an actor. And she beat Emma Thompson and Juliet Stevenson, who are have very beautiful. Have I never told you this?
Wow.
Steve? She's
And
no,
accent.
she
Yeah.
and then she did a TED talk about winning this Audie, and I was very excited. So that was good. And for this one, I picked this. They sent me 3, and I picked this guy because he was from North Carolina. Because I was like, unless you're a British guy, it's very hard to get a Southern accent right. So if and people are capable of doing it, but. And it's sort of like it helps you understand, he could sort of understand the thinking of it too. And so then they have you listen to it. And so you can, and Steve never listens to his, he's braver than I am, but to make sure they pronounce things right. So he had pronounced a name wrong, which they fixed in post. But it was so interesting, Bergen, because like there were, I wrote that book. I know exactly what's going to happen, but while I was listening to it, the way he delivered parts of it, it never occurred to me. And there's one part toward the end where a guy says something, Ward says something to Emily, one of the characters, and his voice breaks in the middle of the sentence. And I was like, oh my God. And when I wrote that sentence, I was like, this is a very sad sentence. But the way he delivered it, it was A++. I am telling you. So it's really great when you get an audiobook reader who gets it. And yours did, Steve. So,
Yeah, no, I think they're wonderful, but you're right. I can't listen to the whole thing, only because it exists inside your head and yours alone for such a long time, and it's completely your property. And then when you put it out in the world, it's no different than publishing the book. People are going to read it how they read it, but a narrator is also can put their spin on it. And by the way, that's their job, So this is not a bad thing that's happening. It's so long as you get the right narrator. And I've been very lucky. I've had
you have been
Harris
lucky.
just narrated a short story that I wrote, which was fantastic, and I put him through the ringer because there was a lot of Italian in the story. And so, and then the actor Michael Urie did my previous audiobooks, and he's someone I selected. Well, so my novel, The Editor, is about a young writer who forms a friendship with Jacqueline Onassis when she was working as a book editor in early 90s New York. And Michael Urie had done a one-man show where he plays called Buyer and Seller, where he plays
which I saw
other characters, Barbara Streisand. Yeah, and he's fantastic, and he originates as well. So I was like, oh, if you can do Barbara, I'm sure you could take
that
on
is the
Jackie.
Funniest show ever too. So
yeah, a brilliant play by Jonathan Tollins, and I think it was filmed for PBS. I think Michael, if anybody
I think I watched
for that
the film.
for quarantine viewing. Yeah,
that was so funny. So
I want to go back to parallels between both of your books, and just kind of the use of language. In your book, Julia, there's a lot of like one-liners and jokes and things that are kind of just sort of like funny but kind of moments. Is that something that comes naturally to you, and you made those up, or have you like kept a list your whole life of those kind of like old sayings, or is it something that you researched?
Oh no, a lot of them are made up. There are a couple that I have treasured for many years, and one of them is like, you got to put when you want to make something accessible to somebody, you say you got to put the hay down where the goats can get to it. And that was something Bill Clinton said in like probably the 80s or whenever. And I thought that was so funny forever. So I was like, well, that's going to go in there. And but yeah, no, that they just come to because my husband, I've honed my sense of humor on my husband for 30 years. And like he and I will both see an opportunity for a joke, and we both get the spiral. I was like, which one of us is going to get to it first? We're always so excited, like when one of us gets before the other one, which is like not a small thing. I mean, it really helps. I don't think I would be as funny, she said, congratulating herself, if without him, because it's just, and it's been so for the pandemic, and I'm sure it's like this with you and your husband, Steve Byron, is that this pandemic would have been 1,000,000 times harder if there weren't somebody here to laugh with me about it. So
yeah, it's true. And I also live with a comedy writer.
Oh my God, he's so funny.
My husband Byron Lane, whose debut novel came out last summer called The Star is Bored, based loosely on his friendship with Carrie Fisher. And it's one of the funniest books I've ever read. And Julia knows too. It's not just me saying that. The New York Times agrees.
It's hilarious.
And it is true. It is funny. Like there is competition sometimes for jokes, but it does help when we make each other laugh. And that has absolutely helped. I think this past year has been make or break for couples. And we just got married, so hopefully
they got married a week ago.
Yeah, a week ago. So we just made it
through. Week anniversary.
So, yay.
So similarly, I think similarly with the Guncle rules, I was going to tie that back. Is that something that you made up on the fly, or those kind of rules that was that something that had come before, or was it something you created for the book? Because that seems to me like there were so many great ones.
Well, framing them like that, and Patrick does have these sort of rules for living that are throughout the book, and that is something I've it created for the book. I don't take these as hard and fast rules, but it did allow me to use some great lines which I've long held. So something like bottomless mimosas are not the same thing as pantsless mimosas. So you learn that part. When you're getting out of a restaurant. But so great lines like that. And then language is just always, sometimes I went back to MAME for inspiration, or tried to find, in creating something timeless today, using some lines from the 50s and 60s sometimes were fun and took on a new meaning. Like MAME had a line like, putting together a party, who should we invite? Oh, let's shake the fruit tree and see who falls. But having a gay man say that line, there's an added, wordplay on fruit, kind of, that, is a little, might be a little edgy, but it's fun to play with language that way too.
Lauren's asking, how much of a final say do you have in the jokes that make it into the final copy? How much does an editor have for your humor when they don't think it will work? Like, have you guys ever run into that?
Steve should answer this one. Go for it.
I have a brilliant editor at Putnam named Sally Kim. Fortunately, she seems as delighted by my jokes as I am. So I'm very lucky that but she will push. That is, and I wrote a novel called The Editor, celebrating, that was the one about Jackie Onassis, but celebrating editors because they do so much heavy lifting. Because it's and sometimes cheerleading too, because here's the thing, you go through a novel, so many drafts, so many times, and then the copy, and then your editor, then a copy edit, then you're looking at the layout before it goes to press, and these things aren't funny to me anymore, because I've heard the joke of, part of humor is being surprised, and I am anything but surprised by these jokes anymore. Although once in a while, Julia, you and I will be like, I actually don't remember writing that one. That's pretty good. And
that's a good joke.
That's a good day. That's a good day. But that's where you really rely on your editor to remind you, like, oh no, this is solid. Otherwise, I would have taken that red pen and.
Well, does Sally do this with you? My editor will put in the margin, I love this joke, and I'm like, thank you, because I just want people to like my joke.
Yeah.
I want to get picked for the kickball team. That's really all I'm after here.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to talk about one thing that was interesting to me, which was the timelines in both of your books. In Julia's book, the whole story is kind of told as a remembrance, and it's it's kind of at the end of something happening. There's there's not anything new that's really going to happen. I mean, sort of at the end of the book, but it's really like somebody looking back. Whereas Stephen's book really has a sense at the end that it's really about moving forward. How did you guys come to those? As I was saying before, those kind of ways to approach the book, because there's any book, both of those subject matters, you could come at them from any different direction. But what made you decide to focus kind of on those different timelines? Julia, if you want to go first.
Okay, well, as an older person, because I'm going to be 62 pretty soon, I think the things that happen to you when you're young, they make different sense to you when you're old. Like, you can see things that you didn't see before, which was very interesting to me. And things are going to happen later on. You get to find out, like, because he leaves, there's several chapters after he is no longer at the Dude Ranch. So there's needed to be some distance there, and for him to understand the importance of things, I felt like he had to be an older person. And my mother is a doctor, and she is 92 years old, and alas has very bad dementia and is in an old folks home, which is heartbreaking to me. And just that whole thing that for him to be like somebody who'd been the center of people's lives and then to be shuffled aside, like that was a big part of the book to me. So that's why there is that frame up there. And the difference is he's physically frail, but his mind is sharp, and it's the other way around for my mother. So, but the upside of dementia in a pandemic is she can't remember how long it's been since I've been to see her. So that's the plus. And I've gotten both my shots, so I'm going to go see her in a couple of weeks. So.
Oh, good.
Good. Yeah, I thought of this book as a season of healing for Patrick and the two kids. Like that's really how I sort of came to it. So I made it an actual season. It was a summer that they were going to spend together, and that was interesting because I really do think that the end of the book is very much a beginning for these three characters again. It's the first book I've written that I could imagine writing a sequel to. One, because I sort of get them to a start, and see them launch off. And I love these characters so much. It was I really would love to spend more time with them and make sure they're okay. But there was something really interesting about writing a book about grief and then setting it in a place with aggressive, endless summer and sun and positivity. That sort of how do you grieve when the sun never goes away? There's no weather to match your
no
mood.
Nordic noir thing, Donna.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so summer lent itself to that. But a character of Patrick who's very much stuck in his life, and I needed to get him unstuck. And so the arc is the point from A to B is shorter because the book takes place mostly over 3 months. But that's all I needed to sort of get him unstuck and back to the land of the living.
Mm-hmm.
We only have a few more minutes. I can't think I touched on this earlier, but at the start of the Guncle, we see Patrick. He's kind of shallow. He's kind of this bon vivant who kind of looks for himself. And by the end, he really becomes this character who's really wrestling with some heavy duty stuff. And he's really starting to deal with a lot of ghosts that have been following him around for a while that he hasn't dealt with. The same with Ward. He kind of at the beginning is kind of sexy and naive. And then we actually literally see him age and mature before the end of the book. Is this something that you guys map out in advance, like the changing of the character, or is this just something that naturally happens as you're writing the book? The maturity level or the evolution.
Again, it goes back to the idea of characters speaking to you. With Patrick, it's all in there. It's just, for me as the writer, it was important to decide how much he's going to share with the reader. Patrick, it's not that he's shallow and he becomes a deeper character. It's that he's a very deep character, but he keeps it all bottled inside. And, it's my job to know how much and when to dole out and for him to let the reader in, and discover these bits of himself alongside his own discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara is asking the question, if either of you watch stand-up comedy, and do you have a favorite comedian?
I don't really watch it. I watch funny things, like funny movies. I read funny books.
Yeah.
You know what the funniest book I just read was? It's because I saw somebody ask about that. And I think Steve has read it too, which is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Yeah. Did he blurb you? I can't remember.
He did, yeah. He was kind enough to blurb the Guncle, which is always nice to have a Pulitzer Prize winner name on.
Yeah, I mean, that book is so
I was like,
funny.
Let's make mine smaller and his bigger.
Yeah, no, but it's so funny. And so I was like, how did I not read this before? And a really funny book is hard to find, and it's such a treasure.
Yeah.
That I really...
Yeah. We should give a little shout out to our friend, the Roxy Letters.
Oh my God, I snorted with that.
And it's one of the funniest books. Mary Pauline Lowry.
Mary Pauline Lowry. That came out last week.
Just came out in paperback on Tuesday. So if you're looking for a funny book, check that out. I've watched stand-up. Certainly, there are comedians like Eddie Izzard, for instance. I've always, Spalding Gray is someone I've always liked this sort of long form, almost like monologuists who are funny. This is sort of what I respond to more than just traditional joke. But as Julia said, movies. I love like James L. Brooks, those types of movies, that I sort of grew up with, and movies that are funny with an enormous amount of heart. That's sort of where I got the brand for what I do.
If anybody has any final questions, I have a final question, and we'll be happy to take maybe one or two more questions here at the end. But what's next for you guys? Writing something together, and then I put Hollywood ? Maybe a pilot.
I'm all over that. Yeah, let's do it.
Are you my mom or my agent? That's what's next? Come
on. Steve has a very lucrative. He's turned all his books have sold for movies, so he's busy writing the screenplays of those. I know.
Well, two. So Lily and the Octopus and the Editor are both in development as movies, and things have slowed down in the past year because of COVID. But both are now picking up steam, and it would who knows? Maybe I'll have two movies in production at the same time. That would be
exciting.
That would be wild. And I did write the adaptation for the Editor. I did not write the adaptation for Lily and the Octopus, but there's a wonderful writer named Michael Mitnick, who did a great script for that. So I'd like to see a movie happen. That would be exciting to see what's next. And then the Guncle comes out.
Is that the first script you've written?
I'm sorry?
Is that the first script that you've written?
It's not the first script that I've written, but it would be the first script that was actually made into a film if it happens. So we'll see.
Julia, what's up with you?
Well, I did this. I adapted Be Frank With Me. It's the one you can see over here. Just to keep from slitting my wrists while I was waiting to hear back from my editor, because I had such PTSD. The second novel was very grueling for me. Like, I really just couldn't. It was the worst. But it turned out okay. It's lighthearted. Yay.
It turned out great. But Julia, we were both with our first books. We were like, we can never write another book because we put all of our jokes into our first novel. Yeah. And then we're like, a lifetime of punchlines, and then we're like, wait, we got to write another one?
I know. I think that's true. Like, if you, because the girl who lived with us, like, when she read my first book, she's like, I don't know what's going to be in your second book because all your jokes are in this one. And I was like, yes, but you have to. It's important to sell the first one, so you really have to give it 110%. But I adapted Be Frank With Me into a screenplay just to distract myself while I was waiting to hear back, and somebody optioned the book and the movie, so it's in pre-production. And being in pre-production means very little. It could happen, it might not happen, but that's exciting. And then supposedly I'm going to start a third book. I mean, I sort of know what the third book is going to be, and I have little brown notebooks I keep my notes in. Here's my new one. So I have the notebook, so the book is practically written now. So, but it's a heavy lift starting a novel.
Yeah.
So maybe you guys need to start doing stand-up. That way you can work some of the jokes out in advance before they go into the book.
We should go and walk and talks with each other, and just because we used to just crack each other up in between the sobbing over the misery of our lives. Because Steve wrote his second book before I did, and so he had gone through that before me. And it was, it was a dark time, but we both got through it with flying colors,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time here. I would just want to thank everybody for coming. Stephen, you've been fabulous. Julia, you've been fabulous. The audience has been fabulous. Thank you so much for the questions. And remember, if you do decide to buy the two books, Better Luck Next Time and the Guncle, make sure you go on to Nowhere Bookshop. There's a little buy button on the main banner of the book festival, and purchase it because they are an indie bookstore that always needs help. Hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Absolutely.
I send them autographed book plates too, and Steve will when his time comes. So
Yeah,
there you
and
go.
The Guncle doesn't come out till May 25th, so you'll be pre-ordering now, and it'll arrive just in time for Memorial Day weekend, and you'll have something to read, maybe
Yeah,
at a beach or at a pool, and some endless sunshine for yourself.
Well, thank you guys so much. And I hope the rest of the audience sticks around and checks out some more of the panels because they're all awesome. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, and hopefully in person
Thank you.
sometime. I would love to come to San Antonio.
I
But thank you
know.
for having us.
Good luck on your tour, too, your virtual tour that will maybe evolve into a real tour by the end. So congratulations,
see.
everybody. Take care.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.